The very last part of our course concerns a very special topic, which is one of the main research of our studio. We are talking about the eco-village. The eco-village is a very special topic in the history of the 20th and 21st century. It is quite unusual, but it has a great potentiality for the contemporary and the future life, for the sustainable settlement. Generally talking, for eco-village, it is intended all those kind of settlement, low scale, small, which intend to proceed a sort of life in harmony with the nature. The word itself, eco-village, is quite clear, is quite explicative of the nature of those settlements. Eco-village is composed by ecology and village. So, definitely we are talking about village. Those villages could be rural or peri-urban or even urban village. So it is not related on the economy. Generally talking, the eco-village, they have a multiple function. According with the nature of the local economy, can be more oriented to the agriculture or also could be only residential. But generally talking, we are in front of a settlement which has a multiple function. One key point of the eco-village is life, work, leisure, in many cases following the philosophy of 0 kilometers. 0 kilometers, it means that working place and residential place are very close to each other. Better if they are few hundred meters far. This is why eco-village are called village, because generally speaking they have a limited number of inhabitants and limited development in terms of surface. For eco, for ecology, we intend, it's a very common word nowadays, it has all those strategies, all the technologies which are oriented to the sustainability. So the eco-village are definitely small settlements which are oriented on the sustainability. Sustainable life, a form of settlement which can ensure the life for the following generation, respecting the nature, without consume too much non-renewable energy. The history of eco-village, it is quite recent. We can say that the modern definition of eco-village come back to the 1960s, 1970s. But this kind of settlement, the idea of eco-village, it is extremely old. And we can assert that it started since the beginning of the human civilization. On this point, we have discussed about something more complex than a simple eco-village. The eco-village itself is something very complicated in terms of articulation of the thinking. For example, the eco-village concept, the main concept of the eco-village, it is one village, one settlement, which is very close to the nature. And why have to be very close to the nature? Because in the human mind, the nature, it is always a sort of mother. It is always a sort of ideal situation. Coming back to the nature, it has always a positive meaning for most of the contemporary philosophy, but also ancient philosophy. Since the beginning of the history, there is always a sort of opposition, a sort of friction in between nature and civilization. Cities, big settlement, they are always a sort of a place where sin, corruption, not harmonious relationship in between people and people, intrigue. In short, a place full of contradiction, full of problems. On the opposite is a constant view in the history of the human being to perceive the nature with something beautiful, harmonic, an idyllic situation. It's clear, for example, the reference on the terrestrial paradise. It is also clear the idea of Arcadia, which is a constant philosophy, a constant idea in all the history of the Renaissance and post-Renaissance age. In the philosophy and in poetry, it is a place, an idyllic vision, of course, not realistic, but idyllic, where the human beings are in perfect harmony with the nature. A place where the simple life, with the simple needs, are considered perfect, without the contradiction of the civilization. And the civilization in many perspectives are considered negative, even nowadays. In the history of the human culture, beside the opposition in between culture and nature, there is another very important concept that, in our opinion, it is fundamental to describe the idea of eco-village, which is the idea of utopia. We know very well that the word utopia, it means a known place, a place, topos, which doesn't exist. The word utopia, it is quite recent. It starts with the book with the same name, Utopia, written by Thomas More, which describe a place, generally talking an island, or a very remote and far location, completely separate with the known world. For a certain coincidence, a traveler visited this place. He was unable to locate geographically this island, or this lost paradise. And once he came back to our world, he gave the description, literary description, of this wonderful place where the life is fair, there is a perfect equality in between people, the life is in harmony again with the nature, and so on. The idea is not original from Thomas More, but of course come back to Plato. But what it is even more important is that the same idea of perfect place in perfect harmony between nature and human civilization, this kind of idyllic world, it is the prototype of every form of eco-village in the modern time. Of course, during the 18th century and the 19th century, there are a lot of philosophers, but also activists who try to create this idyllic society. For example, the Phalansters, the work and the mission of Fourier, the socialist community, but even the Mormon in US, for example, they follow somehow this philosophy. What it is very important is during the development of the 20th century, also the work of Ebenezer Howard, for example, the famous theorist and urban planner, follow this idea, but also the Cité industrielle of Tony Garnier intend to recreate a sort of combination between the industrial city in harmony with the geographical location. And this is not a contradiction about the eco-village, because the eco-village, it is always an idea to create a human settlement in harmony with the geography. This is the key point, this is the key statement for the eco-village. Generally talking, the eco-village, they should follow a certain kind of rule. The key rule is ecology. Every intervention, every development of this form of village have to be respectful for the nature. And then it starts a sort of discussion about which kind of technologies, which kind of material, which kind of urban planning have to be followed for create this kind of settlement. As we mentioned before, the eco-village has the rule to be very small. According with the investigation around the world, it exists thousands of eco-villages, a little bit different between each other, but with the same core philosophy. In every case, the eco-village are limited in between 3 people, but no more with 2,000 people. If the number of the people increase, then the eco-village it is transformed in something else. It becomes more related to the, for example, sustainable district. It is more related on sustainable city. When the scale becomes much bigger, then the idea of sustainability, yes, it is still inside the needs, inside the objective of the planner, of the designer, but finally it is always a kind of compromise. Then a question come out: why the eco-village have to be small, have to be limited in terms of number of people and size? And this is a very logic and very simple to understand. Few people need few resources. Limited space generate less impact on the natural environment. For example, every human settlement need for space, water, food, and generate waste. The energy necessary for the small settlement is much less than big settlement. This is why, generally talking, a small eco-village has less impact in terms of non-renewable resources, non-renewable energy on the local environment. Yes, because we have to remember that the eco-village, it is always a settlement, human settlement, which need resources. If the settlement are limited in terms of size and number of the people, probably the local environment, the natural resources in the surrounding, is able to offer, to fulfill the needs of the village. But if the size of the eco-village, of the settlement in general, it is bigger than a certain number, then the local environment is not able anymore to provide enough resources. And then it needs import. It is necessary to import those energy or food, and at the same time, the environment is unable to absorb the waste of the community. This is why there is no mathematical rule to decide that an eco-village have to be a certain number. For example, 100 or 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000. But the best practice cases shows that the size in between 100 or 200 is simply perfect in terms of eco-balance. 2000 is also acceptable, but over 2000, the needs of the settlement in terms of non-renewable energy, it become a little bit too demanding, and the local environment is not able anymore to provide those kind of resources. The eco-village in general are very different form of settlement compared with the normal village and the normal district. One element which is very important to point out is the eco-village, because of his nature of ecology. It is not a common rural village. A rural village, for example, where the main economy it is agriculture, it is something very different. The eco-village, generally talking, it is not made by farmers. It is not something which follow completely the tradition of the common village which is everywhere in the world. For example, Italy or China, they are deeply rooted into the rural village, rural economy. But in the case of the eco-village, in most of the cases, the agriculture, it is not the main economy. It is only a way to produce food and recycle waste in order to let the local population survive. Local population provide food and resources. Rural village, it is a kind of traditional settlement. Eco-village, it is not traditional anymore. For example, the social organization of the eco-village, it is extremely different compared with the rural village. In many cases, the eco-village are based on a sort of socialist or even anarchic community, because the system of governance, it is no more based on what it is the common political organization of the rest of the world. Generally talking, it is not a democracy in the common sense that we intend for these words. It is the system of election of the leaders is quite unusual. For example, there are some community where it exists a sort of big father or big mother or guru, the founder of the community, and everyone in the village follow him like a sort of ideal father or ideal mother. In many cases, for example, the local regulation are a little bit different compared with the country where the eco-village is hosted. In some cases, there are some extreme cases where the economy is completely different from the country that hosts the village. They have a different monetary system. They have no bank. They have a different system of loan. In short, the eco-village, generally talking, has a different organization compared with other communities. So we have seen how unusual is the concept of eco-village compared with the common settlement, village, town, or cities. They have a different logic of approach with the history. They intentionally won't be separated by the rest of the world. They won't be in harmony with the nature, which usually doesn't appear in the big cities or in the town, except a few cases. They have a very often different social organization. They have a different form of governance. They have a different monetary system, sometimes. They have a different approach with the architecture. and urban planning. In many cases, there is no private ownership of cars, but they have a very interesting system of car sharing. And the implication of this idea is the rule of design and planning an eco-village is, generally speaking, completely different by the normal settlement. I give you a very simple example. Generally talking, we can say that there are cases where the eco-village follow the policy of car-free. What does it mean, car-free? Car-free, it means there is no car allowed inside the boundary of the village. Car-free, it means no car are permitted inside the village. And then a lot of questions could rise up. For example, yes, but how the people move inside? What about the disabled? Well, everything is very easy because we are still talking about community with 100 or 1,000, at most 2,000 people in one community. And generally talking, this kind of eco-village are based on walking distance or bicycle distance. Everything is very reachable in a few minutes of walking, but especially the people who decide to join this kind of alternative form of life, they are deeply conscious in terms of environmental protection. So they are very happy to renounce to the relative comfort of the car in order to have a better life. For example, no pollution, no risk, no traffic jam, no car accident. So the advantages are very consistent. Walkable distance. Well, nowadays there are a lot of problems concerning the physical activity. Many people spend a lot of money to go to gym. Many people decide to have a healthy life doing jogging. In the eco-village, because of the absence of cars, everything follows this kind of life. There is a perfect system of combination between healthiness and logic of the plan. It means that there are also some strategy for design an eco-village. For example, an eco-village, because it is based on many cases of car-free policy, then we have to design doors, gate, parking car, because it is simply forbidden for a car to go inside the village. And then there are additional problems that have to be solved. I talk about problems, but probably it is better to discuss about issues, because a car-free policy inside the eco-village is not a problem. Actually, it is an advantage. On the opposite, there is also one necessity. Very often, the people who live in the eco-village, they have a normal job. And very possible that this normal job, it is located into a town, city, or even megalopolis. So how can we coordinate a life inside an eco-village with eventually a very important job in a big city? That is very simple. It is very possible to solve also the problem. The eco-village have to be coordinated with a bio-regional system of transportation. It is possible to demonstrate, but we have no time to discuss about this issue in this class, that it is possible to coordinate, to generate a sort of connection, linkage between the village and, generally talking, the rest of the world. This is possible thanks of a theory which is called the smart node theory. We can imagine the smart node theory as a sort of connection in between key points in the bioregion. For example, there is the possibility to connect a small town, eco-village, with the city center of a big megalopolis. How to do? We can imagine a walking distance in between the private apartment of an eco-villager. Walking distance is no more 10 minutes or 50 minutes. He can reach a bus station or a parking car where he can share the car or a minibus to a bigger train station or subway. Then this subway or train will connect those people into the city center, from the city center to the working place. It is possible to cover this distance in less than 30 minutes or 1 hour, if everything is well coordinated, of course. Nowadays, with the theory of the IoT, better, not the theory, but the theory and practice of the IoT, it is very possible to coordinate all the different transport from your private home to every other part of the world. If the IoT practice it is coordinated with the theory of smart node, it is very easy to link eco-village with the rest of the bioregion. The smart node is very complicated to design. Probably one of the best smart node in the world, which is the Berlin Hauptbahnhof. That is a great example of a smart node. A smart node usually contain a sort of inter-exchange in between different transportation systems. For example, in that station in Berlin, there is the coordination of a national train, subway, shops, parking car, biking, subway, all together. Of course, everything is well designed, German style, very rational, very clear, very logic. So it is a case to connect the city center of Berlin, for example, with the rest of the country. The eco-village, it is a very harmonious life in terms of quality, in terms of social relationship. So it is not anymore uncomfortable settlement, separate by the civilization. It is not anymore a place which intentionally keep the distance with the rest of the world, with the technology, with the social debate. It is simply a place where intentionally the people decide to be separate by the common life. In many cases, according with our research and our investigation, the people who decide to live in the eco-village are very cultivated. They have a high degree of education, even PhD. There are theorists who create their own village, which face enormous difficulties during the development of those places. But step by step, they solve every problem. Part of the problem consists in the social organization. I give you one example. The decision making sometimes is very different from the democracy. There is no key leaders. And then the question is how the decision making can be done in such kind of complexity, such kind of unusual social group. Well, it is very interesting because there are cases where the final decision can be done only when 100% of the people, it means all the community, agree on the same idea. The first reaction is impossible because a person have always different idea. It is basically impossible to reach one decision. On the contrary, this is a very clear practice. First of all, because the people who decide to live into the eco-village, they have a common intent. They have a common philosophy. They have a common vision. In most of the cases, they are the founders or the stakeholders, or they are the people who intentionally renounce to the normal life to embrace those kind of special form of life. So somehow they have the same philosophy. But there is one key rule. If someone disagree or have a different opinion, first of all, he should show a very solid reason to be opposite to the decision. Number two, he have to propose a very solid alternative. And then votation again. It seems strange, but in these conditions, it is very possible to reach 100% of the agreement in a very short time. It's a very complex discussion, of course. The argumentation sometimes are very strong, but finally the decision is taken. Another important point that makes the eco-village so special is those people has a very strong environmental concern. They completely refuse or they are strongly against the consumerism. They are strongly against the environmental degradation, which nowadays becomes so radical and so dramatic. They intentionally avoid to have a certain kind of luxury or comfortable life, which is common in our city. Yes, but on the opposite, they renounce to some aspect of the modern civilization, but they reach a much better quality of life. For example, it is behind any argumentation then in the eco-village, the quality of the air, the quality of the food, of the water, the visual impact, the beauty of the village are much better than the ugliness of the city. Yes, because the city is not made only by city center or shopping mall or luxury life. In most of the cases, and this is an evidence everywhere in the world, the modern and contemporary city are ugly. It is made mostly by suburbs, which is very often a very degraded environment. On the opposite, the eco-village, they are small, they are full of nature, they are low scale, low density. The social conflict mostly doesn't exist for the simple fact that there is a mutual social control. The environmental degradation is very low, which it means the quality, the healthiness of the environment is much better. We won't put the idea of the eco-village at the very end of this class about the modern and contemporary architecture for a very precise reason. It seems that the history of modern architecture and contemporary architecture, it is quite controversial. We have seen that there are cases where it is possible to demonstrate that the modernist architecture failed. It is an evidence demonstrated by the quality of the majority of the building in that age. The cities generated by the modernism are the city of the immense suburbs, for example in Los Angeles, but also in many other cities in the world. So the modernism is quite controversial in the result. Everyone loves Frank Lloyd Wright or Le Corbusier or Zaha Hadid. That is the masters, but the masters are no more than 100 names. Most of the production is not so good. Identical discussion can be done for the contemporary architecture. The great masters are bright, are magnificent, they are the avant-garde piece of art. They produce simply magnificent cases, but most of the production is quite ugly. So the modernist and contemporary architecture has a certain kind of controversy. It is not that beautiful system that many historians and many theorists intend to describe. Because of this degradation generated by the contemporary life, because of this degradation of the environment of the city, of the social environment, the idea of sustainability, green architecture, sustainable architecture, passive house, high-tech and low-tech in the direction of the sustainable architecture in order to have a better environmental protection. All this kind of system, it is a very clear reaction to the contemporary disaster, because actually we are talking about disaster. I don't want to be too negative, but there are strong evidence to support the idea that the modernist, the postmodernist and the contemporary city are a very negative entity. And the same can be done for the architecture. The quality of the contemporary architecture is, generally speaking, very low. So the discussion about the sustainability and in detail the discussion about the eco-village could indicate a very possible, feasible and realistic solution for this kind of environmental degradation. Unfortunately, the world is going to be developed in the opposite side. It is clear since a few years ago that the majority of the people don't live into the village or into the town, but in the big city. Over 50% of the human population live in the big city. And this kind of tendency is not going to be reversed. That is the future. Why? Because the big cities are somehow more comfortable. They have better service. They have a more modern life. The quality of the job and the payment is higher. The salary is higher. It is also true that the expenses are higher. The social conflict are higher. The quality of the life is controversial. But the eco-village, somehow, it is a hope for the future. Now, we intend to close our course of modern and contemporary architecture on this point. We believe that the idea of eco-village, of sustainability, is a key point for the future of the humanity. Without this hope, we will have some big problem. But the hope is still very strong. Thank you very much.